Science.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd, where once again we're laughing before we even start. On the show today, I've got Miriam Beloglovsky. Hi, Miriam. And Suzanne Axelsson. Hi, Suzanne. Yay. We tried to have this conversation. We tried to record it like in what we thought was a quiet corner of the expo hall at NACY, and got interrupted, and then we got back to it, and then when I got home I realized I hadn't recorded it. So we're gonna try it again. So I'm really glad you both are here. I'm gonna start with this quote, which is from your Facebook page, Suzanne, The Interaction Imagination. And you said, I think there is often a lot of confusion between the idea of loose parts and having a wide range of materials available that are open to multiple possibilities. The essence of loose parts is their looseness, not what they are. So the same stuff can be both loose parts and materials, depending on the intention and how they are being used. So, of course, I want to hear both of your thoughts on this, but I want to start with you, Miriam, because you kind of had some thoughts on another post that kind of led to this. And so I'm going to ask you to start this off.
I know. I was so glad when I started reading the post that you put up there, Suzanne, because this has been a struggle for me. Mm-hmm. When I'm reading everything that is circulating in social media and this whole idea of loose parts and the list of loose parts or loose parts and Valentine's Day or Christmas, and with a very adult directed purpose. So I think the initial concept of loose parts has also been completely, I'm going to say, demolished, mm-hmm. and it's misunderstood.
Yeah.
So when you started posting that, my reaction was, yeah, somebody's saying it without me having to say it. So thank you for saying that. And thank you for continuing to have this conversation, because it is important. I mean, mm-hmm. loose parts are not about the object. It's about the interaction that children have as they explore the different materials and different objects. So yeah, it's about the looseness.
Possibilities.
The possibilities of discovery, yeah.
The possibilities for the child. Like, I think adults often will set out what they're calling loose parts, and they've already got possibilities in their mind, right? And that's when it stops being a loose part for me, or that's one of the things that.
And sometimes they have, even if I think we always have some kind of agenda. We can't let it go as much as we try, because we have curriculums and various things that we have to keep to. And I think sometimes loose parts can be a really good way of making a more playful way of teaching. And so we have an idea of what children can maybe experience by having access to these loose parts. But what I struggle really, really deeply with is when there is a finished idea. The whole idea is a direction to get to a place because we're building a tower, because in that tower Rapunzel's going to live, and then we're going to tell the story of Rapunzel, but they're called loose parts. Well, no, they're just parts then. It's just stuff that we're doing. It's not connected to the loose parts theory of many possibilities. It is suddenly the possibility of building a tower, and whether it works or not. That's not the entire theory. It's just stuff we build a tower with.
Right. I went to a conference 5 or 6 years ago, and one of the sessions was supposed to be about loose parts. And so I went, and the tables had like just the empty frame front and leaves and sticks. And there was an assignment, like here's your loose parts. Now make a self-portrait. I was pretty new to loose parts at the time, but I was still like, I don't think that's what this is. Like, I think you've just given me interesting materials to do an assignment with, not here's stuff that has possibilities. I can't wait to see what you do with it, or what your ideas are for the children.
I mean, for me, that's been one of the hardest parts, since we published the initial book, and then the subsequent books where we kept building on the theory. And all of a sudden, all these people become sudden experts on the subject, and they're not, I don't want to call it right or wrong, they're not understanding the depth of what it is. I mean, even recently, I've been doing a lot of thinking about the theory, the
Is it
Simon
Simon
Nicholson.
Nicholson?
And he coined the term, but the exploration and the use of loose materials or unscripted materials have history all the way back to the 1920s.
Oh.
So we never talk about that. So there's a lot of depth in the research that supports the use of these unscripted materials. I mean, we can even take it probably, although Froebel was a little bit more concise in what he was proposing with the gifts. But moving forward, there are a lot of researchers, the Discovery Schools, Jerome Bruner, there's a lot of different theories, and we never talk about that. We just assign this to Simon Nicholson.
Yeah, I didn't know the rest. I always assume it's Simon Nicholson.
And if you go through play work and the history of play work, you go back to Sørensen and the Skrammellegeplads in Denmark, the junk playgrounds.
Yep. So there's a lot of depth in the work. We just never talk about it. So it's not for me what I always fear. I fear this was going to become a fad. So when we published the first book, I thought, oh my gosh, people are just going to, when it started selling, like it sold out the first day in Nacy when it was released. And my fear was it's going to become a fad. All of a sudden the depth of the work is going to be lost. And in a way it has.
Yeah. I don't know how you do it, both of you as authors, because I haven't even published. I'm just starting on a book about schema play. And anytime there was a workshop that talked about schema play a couple weeks ago, and I was like, that's my topic. What are you doing? I had to rein myself in and remember it's not mine. But it made me think of this loose parts conversation too. So what did you just
Brown
say?
was actually my professor when I did my master's. So that's when I got first properly introduced to the whole idea of schemas.
The United States is still way behind everybody else with it, but not to derail the conversation. So I'm interested in hearing like how, so what are some true loose parts examples, or ways of using stuff that you would consider in line with that research that you're talking about? Either one of you.
This is a difficult conversation, Suzanne. I think this one you're going to have to jump into. I was reading a post today, and it says play spaces don't need to be carefully curated. They can be messy. I don't know if you read it. And when I read things like that, I always think of you because you always do this. Yes, and
for me when it comes to chaos.
No, because both. You always have this mind of it is both.
Yes.
And I am a firm believer that there's a way to curate and select the materials that you put into the space. So it's not just throwing everything out there and see what's going to happen. Even in play work, there's a level of organization there, in the materials that are selected, or junk play arts. There's still thought process that goes into it. And I think we take this polarity of it's this or that. And I think that's also very permeating in all the different play conversations and play groups that are formed. There's the people that are up here, the people that are up here, and there's always both. There's a room for both. I mean, I believe in curating, in really being thoughtful of the materials that I put in the spaces. Doesn't mean that they need to be perfectly placed or beautifully organized. But, I don't need to have the beautiful basket that goes with it. Although I find baskets very comfortable to organize more than kids or plastic bins. But there's a thought process that has to go into it.
Yes, I agree. And I think it's the process and the reflection and the thinking. It's all that kind of, the parts is the tip of the iceberg, and all that reflection is what's underneath. And that's what matters, because if you don't have all of that, it's just things that are there. and it's random, and it doesn't have that depth of potential and possibility that it would have the entire iceberg with all the stuff that we have under the water as well. So yeah, it's all that reflection, and I don't think people often feel they have the time to do that kind of reflection. And that's why there's this copy paste culture of, this is the stuff I need, this is the list I have, I've got that stuff out, and I'll do these things the way I've always done it, with a very teacher down kind of way of doing it, because there's this stress of leveling up all the time. And I think loose parts theory, as that relational kind of way of being with things and interacting with things, is slow. It's not like slow motion. It's just, it has a different rhythm where you don't have to level up. You don't have to achieve certain things. You can just mess around with that stuff and enjoy it, which I think lessons don't have that.
And just the capacity of just being there as you're moving the materials, as you're touching them. I mean, I have these, I always have things in my desk, but I have these beautiful, this is a Jenga set that I found in one of those design stores. And we were playing with it in an overhead projector and on a light table. It was just, two adults doing this, fun of it. And all of a sudden we started discovering all these things that were happening. So we started putting transparent sticky notes, and then we started putting the cubes on top, and all these patterns started emerging. And we were like, wow, we would have never thought of that. So I think it's so crucial that we take the time to really reflect on the possibilities the materials offer. So for me, it's a real disservice when we give people a list, because that means they're going to go buy them and not going to know what to do with them. And then the children are not going to know what to do with them. And, it's a difficult thing to help people understand. I think for the work that I do, this is probably the hardest, talking about that intentionality.
I think adults playing with the materials and understanding how they work and feeling more comfortable with all of those possibilities enables us as adults to give permission to the children.
Right.
Because
but I think someone has to.
Sometimes children know what to do with it if they're given permission and the time. And I think sometimes it's our limited way of understanding the materials that means, no, you're using it wrong. Or children feel that they can't do it that way, and they're looking up to the adult. May I?
Yeah. I think the adults in some cases need that permission too. Like, I've tried, or I often try, just putting out loose parts, materials, stuff, in my college classroom. And some of the students have a really hard time thinking what could be done with it. And they just kind of sit around and laugh. And I don't know if they just are self-conscious because other people are watching, and what if they use the parts wrong, or if they just truly aren't able to kind of let go of that teacher script that they've experienced for most of their lives in school, to really explore. And I think that's good for them to experience, because then when they give the children the permission, they've had some of those thought processes and they kind of know, I was nervous that people were watching me, so maybe I'm not going to watch the children right away. I'm going to be over here doing something different. But I do think that it's hard to see that as teaching, our idea of teaching and the kind of the teacher ego we bring. And so what you guys are talking about the reflection and the curation kind of answers that question. If the children are quote unquote just playing, then how am I a teacher? What's my role here? And I think that's a really important piece of it, is your role is understanding play and children, and thinking about how the materials can be included, those loose parts can be included.
I mean, that's why in original learning I talk about we have 3 roles, because it makes it so much easier to think about when they're using the stuff in a lesson, which is like teacher controlled and you have a certain aim, and when it's the children have complete control over the direction and what they're doing and the stories that the stuff is telling. Because that's when we're play workers. So I talk about play workers, facilitators, and teachers, and those are the three roles. And as play worker, I'm supporting the play. I'm not supporting the children, I'm supporting the play. So how I'm curating the space is to make sure the play works. If I'm doing interventions or interactions, is to support the play, not the children, but the play. As facilitator or as teacher, I'm supporting the child and the child's learning. I'm helping each child. What skills do they need? What kind of support do they need? And a facilitator is somewhere in between. And facilitator is like the whole spectrum of almost play worker and almost teacher, depending on the situation. And I think it's really important to have these really distinct roles, that I can't be an excellent teacher unless I understand the children's play. And I can only understand the children's play if I'm in play worker role. So that's why I think, and I'm mostly play worker, facilitator and play worker. The teacher role is my smallest role. And I feel like the more I have to be teacher, I use quotation marks on the
I know
podcast.
we need some kind of noise for the podcast, when we're air quoting.
The more I have to be that, the more I realize that the group is dysfunctional. Either I'm in control too much and I don't trust the children, or the children don't trust me, and I have to work on the relationship in the entire group. Because basically, I think my role as a teacher is to make myself obsolete. Because children are natural learners. So I'm teacher when I'm instructing, and I will always instruct all of the time, in the sense of reading books, in the sense of providing experiences, exposing them to different activities and excursions. This is my teaching and instruction. It's responding with bits of facts when they do stuff. That's my teaching. And then facilitation I see is like stabilizers. On a bike, was it training wheels, you call them in the US. And I'm helping them as much as they need, but the idea is to get those training wheels off as fast as possible so they're on their own, because I know they're going to learn. And I know that they're going to do that within play, in a place that is good for their mental health and physical development too. And my role as teacher is to ensure that the play works. So that's, and I'm inspiring the play. It's but the play inspires me as a teacher. So it's if you know what I mean, it's impossible to say which comes first, because it's they need each other. It's the whole chicken and the egg thing. It's without a bird to lay the egg, there would be no chicken, but without the chicken growing up into a hen, there would be no egg. And it's exactly the same with the whole teaching play thing. You've got to have the player to be able to teach, and you've got the teaching to help the play keep on going, because you can't imagine stuff that you don't have knowledge of. So you've got to have enough knowledge to be able to imagine.
I think what you're saying for me is this idea of control and power, and learning to trust yourself as an educator. And until you get to that point where you really trust yourself and trust the children, it's very difficult to get there, because that's when we start relying on the crutches, on the list, on the curriculum, on the whatever it is. And this is, for me, is a constant struggle, when I'm seeing educators having to control the situation rather than control their power, control their ability to see, their ability to observe, their ability to notice, their ability to be intentional. This is, and what is fascinating, and again, in this one, we're sort of deviating a little bit from loose parts, but I think loose parts has triggered a lot of this conversation, is this whole idea of the discomfort that comes with the unscriptedness and unpredictability of the materials. When you don't know children what they're going to do with it, because that's the whole purpose. You're never going to know what the children are going to do when you put the materials out there. You have ideas of affordances, but that's about it. It's uncomfortable. I don't feel comfortable being in a room where a lot of stuff, like you call it, I should really learn to pronounce it like you do, Suzanne.
Stuff.
Good Yorkshire stuff.
Stuff.
Um, and not knowing what's going to happen. You know, that means I have to really relinquish my control in the way that I understand control. Instead of understanding that you do have the control, but it is not that controlling mode that comes with our understanding or our perception of who we are as teachers.
So you just used the word affordances a little bit ago. Will you talk more about what you mean when you talked about affordances?
Yeah, that's a hard one.
Yeah.
So it's Gibson's theory of affordances. And what he talked about is this idea that when we see an object, we immediately think of what the object or what you can do with the object.
Okay.
You know, like the easiest way to think about it is when you see the signs in the bathroom. You know, this is male, this is female, and then they put one that is genderless, and you don't know what to do because your affordance has to shift. So children see affordances differently. So if you think of a fence, as an adult, we may use a fence to sit on. Maybe we see it as a way of enclosing a space, keeping strangers out of our homes, whatever perceptions we have. Children see the fence as an opportunity to climb, an opportunity to run a stick through it if it's a fence. And understanding that what you see in the material may not be what the children perceive in the material. So it's a really hard concept sometimes for people to understand when I talk about affordances. So one of the things that I do is I talk about how to combine materials. You know, I think about construction, what materials can combine within construction. And then I talk about layering. How do you layer the complexity? When do you know it's time to layer the complexity and add a different materials? So you have a block, you know, you're doing big towers. It's been fascinating, speaking of blocks, because I've been doing a lot of work designing spaces. And what we've noticed, especially here in the United States, at the block, what they call the block area, instead of call it the building area or construction area. And again, that's a whole conversation of whether we should have areas or not, but I'm not going to take it.
I'm writing it down for a future conversation, though.
What I notice is that children are doing more dramatic play than actual construction. So one of the things that I've been doing is, if you really want children to focus on construction, and nothing against dramatic play, don't hear it that way, we need to be very pristine in the thinking of what goes into that space. You know, what do we add? So here we have the environmental rating scales that said, at the animals, at the dolls, at the this and at the that. And if you don't have that, you're not rated high enough. And for me, a construction area is blocks or things you use for building, not necessarily to engage in dramatic play. That children get to the point where they feel that, and I've seen magnificent structures around dramatic play as well. But when we don't put the items there, the children can go get them and still bring them into the space. But it is more curated and designed for specific things. And I've seen a shift in children's ability to build. I've seen higher towers going up. I've seen them learn to balance and widen the towers, circular towers that are more complex, which I wasn't seeing before.
Okay.
Because
that makes a lot of sense. I hadn't thought about it, but that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So those are the things that I'm learning with loose parts. And I think at one point, Suzanne, you and I got into this conversation on Facebook too about the unscriptedness. And I scripted, and you said something. I would love for you to split to go on that one.
I'll just sit back and let you guys fight it out.
There's no need to fight, because I think we're both in agreement with where we're both coming from. So I don't think there's any disagreement. Because I totally get what Miriam means with the unscripted, that the script is the children's idea of putting on it. But I had just, when you mentioned it in the Facebook, I had just been reading a text about that from an Indigenous point of view. It was an Indigenous person who said it. how all of this stuff has a story before it arrives. It has a stuff of how it, the story of how it once maybe grew in the forest. It had the story of how it was made and how it was transported. So all of these things have stories. They're loaded with story that we ignore. And we have, if we're saying it's unscripted, it's a kind of a human-centric way of looking at stuff. And this idea was to decolonize the way we're thinking about the things that we're using, and having some kind of equity with the resources. And it was completely new to me. And so I kind of aired it with Miriam at the same time. And yeah, because I completely get what Miriam is striving to, is to read these parts, because it's that frustration of what word can we use to make people rethink again. But that text of reading a text from the Indigenous person, I can't remember the name now.
I was just going to ask you for the name of the book.
I think it was a Sami scholar here who lives in Norway.
Well,
but I will double check. It's Finnbog is her surname. Lisa Ravna Finnbog. And that the idea was that everything has a script. It's just in human-centric ways. We forget that all of these things have the script because we're just looking at how humans can use it. So that kind of blew my mind.
Yeah.
It's a different perspective. I mean, I started using the idea of unscripted, unpredictable, unconventional, and upcycled as a way of explaining, as a reaction, because when you say, how do you handle people all of a sudden trying to be the guru of loose parts, when it's like, we never pretended to have coined the term. We understood that, and we gave credit to Simon Nicholson. But I think we gave context to a lot of the work. I think in each one of the books there's solid research. And I think I'm really proud of that when it comes to the way those books were written. Even the last one that I wrote on my own on children with diverse abilities. I spent a lot of time observing, noticing, researching before I put it on paper. And it was not an easy book to write, because here you're dealing with a whole different ballgame. But that's where the term came. And that's why I started calling it unscripted materials instead of loose parts. It was my reaction to, I'm done with this bastardizing of the term without understanding. Fortunately, the University of Social Media keeps on teaching loose parts 101, which includes Valentine's Day and all of that.
Yeah.
So, I don't think I have much control over what goes with it at this point. So I'm just letting it be what it is. And I continue to say what I need to say.
Yeah.
And moving on, I'm writing another book right now.
Yay. So. All right. What else did I want to ask?
Can I go back to the Indigenous perspective a little bit?
Please, yeah.
Just to add to what you were saying, I was in British Columbia doing a presentation, and Dr. Martin was there, Hopi Martin. And he said, what are you doing? I said, well, we're just going to use loose parts to play. And he says, can we go outside and bring things from nature? So he literally took over my workshop, which was absolutely wonderful and fun. And I learned so much from that, because once we were done, we brought it back into the land and we returned it. And we returned it not just by putting it down, but actually leaving a gift, a creation that became part of the land. And that is what you're talking about, Suzanne, is like every one of the items that comes in. And I started thinking a lot about our friend Diane Cashin. So we always kind of mourn. And Hopi, and how they always talked about, don't bring plastic into the forest or into nature, because that's our tendency. We bring things into the space or outside, thinking that children need that to play, instead of allowing them to really truly connect with the land and with the context that they live in. The other thing, I mean, which has to do with loose parts and not, I've been doing a lot of thinking about the meaning of nature inside. You know, what do we mean by creating natural spaces inside? Is it bringing plants? I mean, what is really informing the work that we're doing? So
I think from a sustainable point of view as well, because I've been walking the land as part of my own kind of process of decolonizing and indigenizing my approach to pedagogy, and to learn from the forest about pedagogy. And I have become more and more aware of this need many preschools have to collect loads of stuff from nature and take it into the classrooms to make these nature areas. Like, you don't need that many pine cones, you don't need that many acorns, or that many whatever it is that you're collecting, because you're changing the ecosystem the moment you start doing that. So what I've been trying to work on is, just as Martin helped you with that, taking it outside, is if I want to use nature, how can I do it outside? And how can I do it in an area that I'm not going to disturb the ecosystem, because everything I can reach and I do it well. I've been testing it much harder on myself than what I would with children. And then when I was working with children, I'm helping them to think about that we need to kind of ask permission or develop a relationship with nature, so that it's like the stories of the acorn, or the stories of the stone, the stories of the moss. If we're moving it, then we're changing the story. And how do we have that right to do that? This is many years ago. We had snails. We had a little area of nature that had so many snails, it was unbelievable. And the children started collecting them and having snail parties. And so then we started asking the children, do the snails actually want to be moved? And they had never made this consideration. And they started thinking about it. No, we didn't ask them. We just took them and moved them. And then we don't remember where they came from. And, you know, that's a long distance for these snails to try and move their way back again at snail pace. And so there became this completely different relationship the children had with the snails, where we started thinking about, well, how many snails are close by? Maybe just those snails we can interact with and develop relationships. Maybe it's through photography or in other ways. And we did the same with dandelions. Instead of picking a ton of dandelions in the world's biggest dandelion bouquet, you start thinking which would die almost instantly. We were thinking, well, how many do we leave for the bees? How many do we leave for other children who want to take? If you pick them all, what rights do the other children have? What rights do the bees have? What does the dandelion have? So suddenly, I mean, I had some people against me and said children's right to pick flowers, but the children got it. They started wanting to take photographs and then framing these photographs and giving it to their parents instead of these dandelions that would be dead no matter how much we put them in water. They developed a different relationship with nature, different relationship with the loose parts, of taking care of them and not just toss around culture. It is amazing when you start thinking about the stories of all of these things that we have and taking care. But yeah, I think we do need to kind of indigenize, not just decolonize, but to replace it with something that is more connected to being with nature rather than consuming nature. That was a rant, sorry.
Yeah, and that includes with shells, you know.
Yes.
So my point is contextual. We need to really be contextual to the space. I mean, I know it's harder in an urban area because you don't have as much exposure.
Yeah.
But there's a context that we need to also experience and explore. You know, if I walk out here in my area, there's tiny little mini pine cones. I can collect hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, but should I collect them and send them to a program in an area where they don't have the types of pine that produces those pine cones so that they put it in their classroom? I don't know. You know, there's something to be said about the community that you live in, and bringing in the gifts that that community is offering you and giving you.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying don't collect stuff. I think we do need some stuff. We just think about how much stuff do I collect from nature so that my children can build a relationship with it. And then as it starts to break, can I return it back to the same place, just as Martin Hopi did. Hopi Martin, it's the wrong way around. Hopi Martin. So that there's this relationship of saying, thank you, we finished using it now, and leaving something extra, or even if it's a song that the children give. Part of the Swedish culture here is with connecting to the forest is you ask permission. You knock on we have a special tree when you go to the same forest at the time that you'd knock on and ask, may we come in for today? And then we go in. So there's all of these, and then we say goodbye as we leave. So there's various traditions of pausing and going in and acknowledging the other.
And I think those are the important things. And it's a constant battle. I mean, that's the other thing why I fell in love with the whole idea of the loose parts or unscripted materials or however you want to call them, because it really broke away from commercialism, you know, commercializing children. You know, I always get in trouble because I start talking about, we don't need the plastic taco, which is a Taco Bell taco. I'm from Mexico. We don't have tacos like that in Mexico, period. So for me is when you give children the capacity to respect the environment, to respect nature, you're moving them away from this constant need to own and this constant need to have. You know, it's I think I was writing about that somewhere, this idea that when you sort of work together, when you, I know what I was reading. I was reading about mandalas, sorry. And this whole idea of altruism that develops when the monks are working on the mandalas, you know, this whole idea of connectedness. And then the ephemerality of letting go, it sort of separates that need to constantly own, that need to constantly have something that you take home with you. And in many ways, it's a difficult concept for children, especially for children that don't have a lot. You know, so we're dealing with a lot of children who have newly immigrated into some of the communities I work with, and they don't have a lot. So it's not uncommon that they transport, speaking schema, they transport a toy from the center in their pockets to bring it home. And the parents, that you know, that many times the teachers think they're stealing, and I go, no, they're sporting. You know, they really need to own. And so it's this balance again on how do you help them sort of live in this idea that you don't need to own all the time, and moving them away from that, but also understanding that ownership for some children also means a sense of control, a sense of safety, a sense of I will get tomorrow. You know, children in foster care in particular deal with a lot of that. So I think as educators, we constantly need to be thinking about all of this. It's not about a list. It's not about just putting a whole bunch of stuff out there without thinking about the story or thinking about the meaning, or thinking about the affordances and connectedness to nature. It's a little bit more complex.
Yeah. So can I ask, because as you were talking, Miriam, it reminded me of when you were talking about the construction area and the rating scales that say these are the things you have to have in your different areas. And like in Indiana, we have our quality rating system is called Paths to Quality. And I haven't worked with it for a while, but when I was a center director, it would say like you have to have 3 to 5 different materials for science in your science area and 3 to 5 different things in your construction area. And so that's where a lot of this gets difficult for some people, I think, because they don't have any choice over where the place they're working is doing this, is participating in this rating system. So how can we help them work loose parts and unscripted materials and this sort of respect for the natural world into a system where they're saying you have to have 3 to 5 pieces of, because it ends up being shells and pine cones and
But I think,
things in the
yeah, but
science
then
area.
it's going back to the affordances. Starting to think about what because one of the courses that I teach at Stockholm University is play through the lens of natural sciences.
Oh,
And so I
I want to
don't
take that
teach
class.
I know,
so I
right?
don't teach natural sciences and how you can make it playful. I basically, what I get the students to do is look at play and see how are the natural sciences happening in that play. And then
Okay.
how can we then support and curate the environment so that it has a bigger lilt towards the natural sciences without controlling it. It's a fine art. But I think just being able to acknowledge because I call it the play assumptions, like loads and loads and loads of verbs that children do. Well, some of those verbs are natural science verbs. Like floating and sliding and all of these different things. There's different natural science verbs, as in scientific verbs that you're doing, balancing, these kind of things. And if you start understanding all of these kind of science terms and mathematical terms, then you can understand the affordances and how these connect. And you start seeing in children's play all of these different things that they need to do, and then they can prove it. They can say, we have these parts, and these parts, and combined they will create these kind of experiences for the children, which are connected to these kind of topics, play, math. So, I mean, this is basically what I've been doing with teachers for the last 12 years now, is training them how to see this in the play, and so that they're not making lessons playful, but they're understanding the play and how to connect it to the curriculum so that they can prove to the authorities that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. So I try to work that way, because I get it. They have to do these things. I want to try and help them to be able to frame it so that they can allow children to play. But I also think, we're talking about control earlier as well. I think we do need some kind of early years revolution to make sure class sizes are small enough so that children have a bigger freedom to play, because the bigger the classes are, the more the adult feels required to control. Because children are not supposed to be in groups that big.
Of the same
They're
age,
not
same age
of
peers.
the same age. No,
Yeah.
they would be in multi-age groups at that, where the older children would support the younger children, and it would be a different kind of dynamic. But you put a whole bunch of 2-year-olds or 3-year-olds or 4-year-olds in the same room in ever increasing numbers as they get older. Yes, we're going to have to end up with more control, because suddenly you have to manage these things in a different way. And if the teachers are also being managed by control above, it's giving them not enough room to feel that they're allowed to make mistakes.
Right.
And because I think part of the learning is making mistakes. Oh, that didn't work, so I'll adapt it and this will work. There's no room for mistake making at all. And yet essentially creativity is getting it right after 99 times of failure.
Science too.
Yes, science too.
Yeah.
Theorizing and testing. And for me, it's like I'm constantly pushing back to this idea that with the rating scales, teachers have no choice. They have to do them. There's a choice within doing it. There is a choice on how to do it. I think the language that we're using in early childhood, especially here in this country, here in California, we have TK, transitional kindergarten, which I basically say they hijack the children.
Yep.
And we having elementary teachers now working with young ones without a lot of knowledge and understanding of child development. It makes it more complex. But I think it's the language. I mean, sort of what Suzanne is talking about. I do a lot of that as well. And I think that's the choice. So how do we help? For me is you know, I told this to a group I was working with yesterday, rating skills are going to come and go.
Mm-hmm.
You know, some places are letting go of the Eckers. Now they're
Mm-hmm.
bringing class. Now they're bringing this. Now they're bringing that. It's all going to
Mm-hmm.
be dependent on who makes the money.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, bottom line, that's what
Yeah.
it is. What remains is what we know, which is this is who children are. There is a developmental process that they go through, the theories that we know and understand and how we apply them, and how do we continue to support them. So my focus is always moving away from this idea, oh, I have to. Yeah, I get it. You have to, but you can do it in many different ways.
Yeah.
It doesn't always have to be this one way. And I think the more we, and I mean we, those of us who are out there speaking,
Yeah.
We have a responsibility to bring that conversation to the front of what we do. You know, we should not just say, oh, they have no choice. I feel so bad for them. No, they have a choice. We need to give them the words, the knowledge. You know, this is where science happens in play, understanding play and see science through the lens of play, or math through the lens of play, so that they can then justify what they're doing.
Yeah.
That's my new thing. You know,
I am learning a lot from just listening to you guys, you two talk today. This is so wonderful, that I hate to wrap it up, but I have to wrap it up because I've got another thing starting in a few minutes. I know. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, do you have last thoughts, last things that you
we have a lot of
get
thoughts.
in?
I think Suzanne and I should be in the same brain power box.
Yes. Yeah. You both, I mean, you both have a standing invitation. Anytime you have an idea, you let me know and we'll record about it. Because I've really enjoyed this.
In close, I'm just going to say, join us in really making sure that there's a deep understanding of the meaning of loose parts.
Yeah.
And it's not just about the object. Stop connecting it to standards. Stop connecting it to worksheets. Stop connecting it to the holidays.
Right. Yeah.
Then you are creating the children's reality. And tell
the loose parts.
Exactly. We need chants and protests. So I didn't at the beginning let either of you talk about your books or where people can find you. So we can end with that. Suzanne, if you want to tell them what your books are and your blog and all that stuff.
I have a blog, Interaction Imagination. It's also on Facebook.
But you have to read. It's amazing.
Yes. It is a really good blog.
And I've just moved over to Substack. So I'm starting over on Substack with, I've actually called it Arboreal Dialogues about Play and Pedagogy, because I'm trying to connect it to the learning that I've had from the trees. So there's a lot of forest references and tree references and coming up. So yes.
Nice.
I have a book called The Original Learning Approach, which is the interweaving of play, learning and teaching as equals. And that they should be equally valued. I also have one in Swedish called Riskfylld lek och undervisning, for you who understand Swedish. But that's basically risky play and teaching. And it looks into, it's essentially autonomous play, and the importance of us addressing our own fears, but also the dangers of a teacher-controlled dictatorship kind of lessons, and the negative implications that has as well. Busy writing another book about play, but again in Swedish.
Oh, fine.
Yeah. Maybe we can have it translated.
Yeah.
And me, what am I doing? Well, I wrote 5 books on loose parts, co-authored. What else have I written? I wrote the book called Just Play.
Right. And we did an episode about that will have been out a couple of weeks ago when this one
very
comes out.
connected to what we're talking about.
Yeah.
I also have written a book on theories, co-authored a book on theories and the application in play, so people can really see it, because I think it's a difficult concept. I wrote another one called Design in Mind, and currently I'm working on a book which I'm co-writing. I just talked to Paola yesterday. You need to bring Paola into this.
Okay.
it's called Revisiting Journeys. And it's this idea that children have the need to revisit. You know, you can't do 15-minute intervals. You need to make things available to them and be able to notice when the revisitation starts. So it's based on, you know, if you think schemas, I identify about 18 ways children enter the inquiry process.
Oh.
And it's really interesting. I did a whole research on this. So anyway, so that's what I've been keeping me busy, plus doing some work for Guidecraft on environments for children with diverse abilities, which is passion and what I want to do. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you both for all that you do, because both of you, the work you're doing is so important and your voices are so important. I really appreciate what I see you putting out there.
We appreciate you.
Yeah, I was going to say the same. Providing a platform. You provide a platform to get information out there, and platforms that are respected, as yours is are vital, because without platforms, it doesn't matter how much we say anything, it doesn't reach.
It's got to get out there to people. Yeah. Well, I'm happy to do it. It's one of my favorite things.
I kept waiting for you to invite me for the longest time. I have to say that.
What? Why didn't I?
No, I kept waiting for you to do it. I finally just said, can I come on your show?
I'm glad you did, because we've talked about this. I was like, oh, Miriam's too big. She would never come to my show.
Oh, no, I would. That would be incredible.
But isn't that exactly like loose parts? Sorry.
Yes.
Same sort of thing. I go into a room and I see loose parts are designed so beautifully, I daren't touch them.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I daren't approach them because they're like too beautiful, too
I don't want to mess it up.
Yeah. And then there's other places where you go, like me, the chaos. You had no problem asking me, because, you know, I'm just there and going.
I know I shouldn't have said that, because I'm sure
but I mean, that's what life is. Sometimes we have all of these little things. There's lots of people I don't dare ask because they feel more scary, and it's not because they are scary, it's just because you're kind of in awe of these people.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that could be. Well, anyway, I really appreciate you both coming on, and hope that we'll have more conversations like this soon. Yeah, and thanks everybody else for listening to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd.